Silas McCrae was already holding her hand when he reached for his rifle. For a heartbeat, it looked like the kind of moment a man regrets for the rest of his life. Clara Bennett was on her knees in the summer dirt outside his cabin near Laramie, barefoot, bruised, shaking, her torn dress clinging to skin that had known too many blows. And now she was kneeling in front of a mountain man, twice her age, her fingers trapped in his rough hand, her eyes wide with something close to panic. "Please don't let them find me," her voice cracked on the last word. Silas didn't answer. He didn't let go either. He knelt low in the dirt so their faces were level, his broad shoulders casting shade over her like a wall against the sun. His hair was tied back, beard thick with gray from years trapping the Rockies, the blue bandana at his throat darkened by sweat. His coat hung loose over one shoulder, and beneath it his chest rose slow and steady, like a man who'd learned long ago that panic gets you killed. A sound rolled down the trail, and for a moment he looked like the danger. Her fingers tightened in his. "They're looking for me," she whispered, barely breathing. "My husband sent them." Silas's jaw moved once. Slow. Silas had known her father, Thomas Bennett, back near Fort Laramie. Silas finally spoke, his voice low and even. "Who's riding?" Clara swallowed. "Men from town. Deputies. He told them I'm not well, that I ran off with something that isn't mine." That was when Silas noticed the bundle. Clara kept it clutched tight against her ribs, wrapped in worn cloth, held with the desperation of someone guarding her last breath, even while she knelt, even while she trembled. She never let that bundle slip. Silas loosened his grip just enough to turn her hand palm up. Her knuckles were split. Not from falling, from fighting. She'd fought for a door, for a breath, for a head start. His eyes shifted, not to her bruises, not to her torn hem, but to the shape beneath the cloth she guarded, paper, folded thick, official by the feel of it. The wind carried the sound again, closer now. Silas rose halfway, still holding her hand, and for a second the shadow he cast over her deepened. He looked like a man about to drag her up and hand her over. Instead, he knelt back down so their faces were inches apart. "You came here for a reason," he said. She nodded once. "My father told me," she whispered, "if anything ever went wrong, to find you. He drew me a little map once, and I followed it today," she whispered. Something in Silas's expression changed then, not soft, not gentle. Certain. His left hand never left hers. His right moved slowly, deliberately, toward the doorway of the cabin, toward the rifle leaning just inside, within reach. He didn't lift it. He only placed his palm against the worn wood of the stock. He kept it there, like a line in the dirt nobody was allowed to cross, a promise without words. Clara drew a shaky breath and finally loosened the cloth bundle just enough for him to see what lay inside. A corner of paper. A red county seal stamped hard into wax. Silas didn't need to read it to understand. Whatever was in that bundle scared a judge more than a runaway wife ever could. And down the trail, the riders were coming. Silas kept his hand on the rifle stock, and he kept his other hand wrapped around Clara's fingers. Her father had trusted Silas, and that was why she came. She said her husband was Judge Horace Whitfield, and in Laramie that title opened doors and closed mouths. She said he smiled in church, shook hands in the street, then turned mean at home when the lamps went low. She said the deputies listened to him because their pay came through his friends, and their futures did too. Silas looked at the bundle again, and he asked the one question that mattered, without making her relive every bruise. He asked what she took and why it scared a judge. Clara loosened the cloth just enough to show more paper, and a corner that looked like court filing. She said she found it where he kept his private things. And she heard him tell a man from the railroad that nobody could ever see it. She didn't say railroad like it was a train. She said it like it was a knife. Silas felt his stomach tighten, because men with titles rarely hit that hard unless they think they can buy the law itself. Outside, the sound on the trail came again, and this time it didn't feel like wind. Silas finally guided Clara toward the cabin, slow and steady, because he knew what was coming next. If Whitfield's riders weren't here for Clara, then they were here for what she carried, and that meant they wouldn't stop at the porch. He guided Clara through the cabin door, keeping his body between her and the trail. He pointed her toward the back corner where a trap door led down to a shallow root cellar. Not deep, not fancy, but dark enough to hide fear for a few minutes. "Stay quiet," he said, steady as gravel. "No matter what you hear," she nodded once. The sound of hooves came clear now, not a wagon. Riders. At least 2, maybe 3. Silas stepped back outside before they reached the porch. Better to meet trouble in the open than let it think it has the upper hand. 2 deputies rode up, dust swirling around their boots. They tipped their hats like this was a friendly call. "Afternoon, Mr. McCrae," the older one said. "We're looking for a woman. Judge Whitfield's wife. She's unwell. Ran off." Silas rested his forearm on the porch rail. Calm, casual, like they were talking about stray cattle. "Plenty of land between here and Laramie," he said. "You planning to knock on every cabin?" The younger deputy shifted in his saddle. "Judge says she may be confused. Carrying documents that ain't hers." There it was. Silas gave a small shrug. "Haven't seen anyone but jackrabbits." The older deputy's eyes drifted past him toward the cabin door. That was when the third rider appeared from behind the trees. A third rider circled the cabin without a word. Silas stepped off the porch before the man reached the back wall. "Don't," Silas said. The hired hand smirked and kept moving. The next few seconds weren't loud, but they were heavy. Silas ducked the swing, drove an elbow into the man's gut, and slammed him into the cabin wall. The hired hand folded, and Silas took him down hard into the dirt. He pinned him face down with a knee on his back and twisted the arm until the fight left the man's eyes. No gunshot, no hero speech, just breath and weight, and a reminder that 51 years of hard living still counted for something. The deputy stiffened, hands drifting toward their holsters. Silas looked up at him, calm as ever. "You boys want this to turn into paperwork," he said, "or do you want to ride back and tell the judge you checked?" The older deputy hesitated. That hesitation said more than any badge ever could. Finally, he nodded once to the younger one. "We'll report back." Before mounting up, the younger deputy muttered something he probably thought Silas wouldn't hear. "Judge wants the papers, not the girl." The older deputy did not look back at the cabin. He looked at Silas, like he was measuring how much trouble a dead mountain man would cause. Then he chose dust over blood and rode. Silas let the hired hand go and watched the riders disappear down the trail. Dust trailing behind them like a warning. He stood there a long moment. He stepped back inside and opened the trap door. Clara looked up from the dim cellar light, fear still fresh in her eyes. "They'll be back," Silas said quietly, "and next time they won't knock. If you're enjoying it, tap like, subscribe, and tell me what time it is where you are and where you're listening from. Because what Clara carried in that bundle wasn't just trouble. It was the kind of truth that could burn half of Laramie to the ground." Silas closed the trapdoor and stood still for a long moment, listening to the fading rhythm of hooves. Silas knew they'd come back, and next time it wouldn't be polite. He looked down at Clara, who had climbed out of the cellar and was brushing dirt from her skirt with hands that still trembled. The cabin suddenly felt too small for what was coming. "We can't stay," he said. She nodded. No arguing, no tears. Just the quiet understanding of someone who has already lost her home once. The sun was leaning west when they saddled the horses. Silas didn't take the main trail toward Laramie. He cut along a shallow bend of the Platte River, keeping low ground and cottonwoods between them and any eyes from town. At one point, Clara asked, not looking at him, "If we go into town, won't he see us?" Silas gave a small grunt that might have been a laugh. "He'll see us," he said. "That's the point. He rode into Laramie to be seen, and he rode into Laramie to be heard before they reached Dr. Price." Silas sent a stable boy with one clean sentence to the telegraph office. "Tell the U.S. Marshal a judge is hunting his wife, and railroad papers are involved." Silas didn't head for the saloon. He turned instead toward a narrow wooden building with a modest sign. "Dr. Eleanor Price." Claire stiffened when they stopped. "She knows," Claire said softly. "She treated me." Claire had slipped Dr. Price a note once, a quiet plea. in case she ever had to run. Dr. Price opened the door before they even knocked, as if she had been watching the street. She took one look at Claire and stepped aside without ceremony. "You brought her here for more than bandages," she said. Silas unwrapped the bundle and laid the papers on the table. The doctor's eyes sharpened. She didn't gasp. She didn't whisper. She just said, "He thought no one would ever see these." And now he knew the marshal was already on his way. That was when a shadow crossed the front window. Not a patient, not a passer-by. Someone had already told Judge Whitfield they were in town, and this time he wasn't sending deputies. The shadow at the window didn't hesitate. The door opened slow, and Judge Horace Whitfield stepped inside like the room already belonged to him. Two men stayed outside, close enough to hear, far enough to deny. Whitfield did not need friends in the room. He needed fear in the hallway. He was dressed clean, boots polished, voice calm enough to fool a Sunday congregation. If a man didn't know better, he might have thought this was a concerned husband come to collect his troubled wife. "Clara," he said softly, "you've caused quite a stir." Silas didn't move. Clara stood, slower than she had that morning, but steadier. "Doctor." Price stepped forward first. She laid her medical ledger on the table beside the bundle of papers. "I've treated these injuries for months," she said evenly. "They're not accidents." Whitfield's smile thinned. Silas unwrapped the papers fully and turned them so the judge could see the red seals facing back at him. Forged deeds, land sold for pennies, and payments that never should have existed. Signatures that tied railroad men to county decisions, and names that could not survive daylight. Whitfield's eyes flickered. Just once. He tried to laugh it off, said Claire had misunderstood, said Silas was an aging mountain man meddling in affairs above him. The men outside shifted, and someone down the hall spoke with federal calm. And when the deputy U.S. Marshal stepped through that same doorway, tipped his hat, and asked to see the documents, Whitfield finally understood. Power works best in the dark. Silas had dragged it into the sun. There was no gunshot, no dramatic duel in the street, just the quiet weight of evidence placed into federal hands, and a man in a fine coat realizing he could not out-talk ink and signatures. Clara did not look back at him when he was escorted out. She looked at Silas, not like someone begging to be rescued, like a survivor with steel in her spine. Outside, the Wyoming sky was still wide and blue. Silas walked her into that sunlight without touching his rifle. Sometimes a man proves himself not by how fast he shoots, but by how steady he stands. Here's the truth this old story leaves behind it. The law isn't always justice. So let me ask you something. If you were standing on that porch outside Laramie, and the law wore the face of the abuser, would you follow the badge or your conscience? Would you risk your name to protect someone who had nowhere else to go? Clara rebuilt her life. He had kept his promise. If this story meant something to you, hit like and subscribe. These Old West stories aren't really about guns. They're about choices. Now tell me this. Where are you listening from tonight? And what kind of sky is over your head?